Yalla, let's go for it.
Yalla, everything yalla. Beautiful word.
First and foremost, dear Judith, let me thank you from the bottom of my heart and from the bottom of my thoughts to have accepted this rendezvous. Since October 7, I have been watching myself progressively losing my ability to read, to write, to formulate ideas, to exchange. The plane hovering daily above our heads in Beirut don't help. The daily bombardments of various regions of Lebanon neither. And the epicenter of pain and suffering, the capital of the 21st century's human shame, being at 300 kilometers away from the desk I'm talking to you from, I hereby name it Gaza, I hereby name it Palestine, doesn't help neither. First and foremost, and before engaging in our conversation, if you'd allow me this abrupt introductive digression. Since Beirut port explosion, I have been suffering from a loss of words. This condition was aggravated since last October 7, and my almost total aphasie, loss of word, was reached a few days ago when I received the video showing a man entrapped by ferocious flames. Aaron left me speechless, wordless, breathless. His 6 final sentences were free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. This was his last video. Like oh so many Ghazawis before who say, this will be my last video. For many months, for many years, our phones have been bleeding, our phones have been crying, our songs have been exploding, yet the carnage continues. Dear Judith, what is your reaction to Aaron's act? What are the words that one, we, you, what are the actions that one, we, you, can try and produce in order to honor him and in order to honor them?
Well, thank you for your words. What you call a digression is hardly a digression. It is the thought upon which we are all fixed and should be fixed. I wish I could tell you what words would work. I think it is clear that appealing to the state powers that be, the United States in particular, most of the European nations, the state of Israel goes without saying, does not help us. They do not receive our words. They accuse us of being murderous when we call for peace. They accuse us of terrorism when we ask for a ceasefire. They accuse us of anti-Semitism when we call for a life that could be lived without violence. So we are trapped in this way if we are speaking to them. So I think that means that we speak to one another and that we try to lift each other as we can. Because even though life is being annihilated every day in Gaza, we all have an obligation to oppose that killing, and to do that, we must regenerate ourselves and each other. I believe no one can regenerate oneself alone. We depend on others to renew our lives and our sense of being alive and alive enough to continue to fight for justice, to fight for freedom. that can only work if we have solidarity and if we are open to the words of others. So we need our poets who have very often become speechless as well. We need whatever words are possible, whatever images are possible, even though we know that the images can be reappropriated by the Israeli state, its media, its hasbara, its propaganda. We know, but we must be able to demonstrate what we know. And we have to use whatever medium is ours. It could be words, it could be images, it could be sounds. Some sensuous medium that gives us a way to establish the reality that we know and to level our objection in the deepest possible terms with the most powerful image, the most powerful voice. I don't know what to tell you, but I thank you for reaching out to me and for considering me an ally.
Thank you.
That honors me.
You were talking about the images and the sounds. It would take me to going back to the loss of words I was telling you about.
Yes, yes.
During this rendezvous, I will, if you'd allow me, I will plagiarize other people's words, sentences, songs, poems, to try and engage in a new form of conversation. Let this rendezvous perhaps be a bridge to find new corridors of meaning. And I wrote, je suis en quête de sens, en quête de son, en quête de mots, to try and, so if you, I wrote many, I stole many passages from many, and let's jump into 1967. The Lebanese singer Feyrouz released an album called Jerusalem in My Heart, with a series of songs in support of Palestine that have become since then an anthem for the Palestinian struggle. In this album, there's one song, Al-Quds al-Atiqa, Old Jerusalem, in which she says, tell them what happened, perhaps consciences will wake up.
صوتي ضلك طاير زوبع بهالضماير خبرهن عاللي صاير بلكي بيوعى الضمير يا صوتي ضلك طاير زوبع بهالضماير خبرهن عاللي صاير بلكي بيوعى الضمير خبرهن عاللي صاير
Perhaps the consciences will wake up. We've been telling, we've been writing, we've been singing, we've been shouting, yet a deafening silence seems to prevail. Dear Judith, how can we wake up consciences and stop the carnage?
I wish I knew, but I think we can say this. The young people keep flooding the streets. They flood the streets in London. They flood the streets in San Francisco and New York. This afternoon, they are protesting in front of the Assemblée Nationale. On Saturday, we meet at La République. They keep showing up. They keep having their seminars online. All of us do, no matter what age. We keep speaking. We keep telling the history of Gaza. We keep reporting on what is happening there, on how people are struggling, how they are dying. We are doing what we can to combat the forces of disavowal. And it is shocking. It is beyond shocking. It is numbing. You know, at a certain point, you're shocked and then you're numbed and then you're shocked again to see how people do turn away, and they have these rationales by which they turn away from the carnage, the slaughter, the genocide. They have words that they use to turn away. They say, oh, justified force, or reasonable force, or self-defense for the Israeli state, or the Palestinian people brought it on themselves. They elected Hamas. All of this. These are words that they use to blind themselves, to turn away so they don't have to see the horror. And sometimes they reverse the horror, and whatever act of violence a Palestinian has committed becomes a symbol for all Palestinian life, or who Palestinian people are. And then that, of course, justifies them again for their slaughter. So there's all this twisting, all this shielding through false rationale and empty justifications. But it is genocide. It is genocide. It fits the definition of genocide as it is stipulated in the Genocide Convention. And people can say, oh, it's complicated. Oh, not so easy. What is that? What is that hesitation, qualification? I think we need our lawyers. we need our political speakers. We need our poets and our artists and our young activists who throw themselves into this. We need all those who care for those who are suffering, who are still alive, to care for those who are suffering. We need expanding circles of solidarity in every walk of life. There is no walk of life that does not have something to offer, whether it's medical or journalistic or legal or educative or artistic. Everybody has something to do. The only question in my mind is how we can keep going when we are also losing our words and our capacity to express ourselves, when we are so wrecked with grief and horror that we don't know whether communication is even possible. And sometimes, I will tell you, I think sometimes people just have to allow themselves to lapse into that speechlessness. Find it. It is true. Allow that and stay with it. Know it as a sign of your responsiveness to the radical injustice, the radical injustice of this systematic killing. And then pass through, not all by yourself, but with others who can maybe lend a voice when you cannot, help you find yours, or just listen as you speak in broken sentences. I read the poetry of Fadi Judah, and this is a man who has written very long poems, and today he writes these fragments. There are many white spaces between the fragments that he can utter, right? These are the fragments that can emerge during this time of horror. That is something. And it also keeps the horror in the picture. It doesn't sanitize it. It doesn't make it into fully formed linguistic exposition or formal poetry in accord with its standard. No. It is fragmented, but the fragmentation speaks, even when we do not, or we feel we cannot.
If you'd allow me more fragments.
Yes.
1961, Les Damnés de la Terre, Franz Fanon.
Oui.
Colonialism is not a thinking machine. nor a body endowed with reasoning faculties. It is violence in its natural state, and it will only be yield when confronted with greater violence. Franz Fanon, that I would like to pair with Egyptian singer Kalthoum. أصبح عندي الآن بندقية.
أصبح عندي الآن بندقية إلى فلسطين خذوني معكم إلى ربا حزينة كوجه مجدلية إلى القباب الخضر والحجارة النبية.
I now own a rifle was a call to armed resistance in '69, and I quote the beautiful song, I am looking for my home, my friends, my books, my pictures, all the flower vases. To Palestine, take me with you. I am with the revolution. I am from the revolution. My weapon has become my cause, my fight. That's the 60s. Those are the fragments that help me now try to find meaning, or what's left of meaning. How does those words, the flower vases or the armed resistance, or resonate in you?
Well, it is unfortunately a very controversial issue to name Palestinian armed resistance for what it is. It is, although Hamas is not even in the United Nations classified as a terrorist organization, and we know the difference between Hamas as a political party, as a network of social services, as a militant wing as well. We know that it is not a terrorist organization. And yet, if you say that here, you say that in the United States, you are therefore taken to be pro-Hamas and a terrorist. So you are shut down very quick. And people are not courageous. They, oh, I don't want to be called that. I don't want to be called that. I cannot. So if I don't want to be called that, do I not name what I see? Do I not say what I know?
The perfect censorship.
Why? Oh, we throttle ourselves. We throttle ourselves for fear of being called, oh, you are Hamas, you are terrorist, you are anti-Semitic, you will lose your job, you will have all of your events canceled, you will lose your friends, you will not be welcome in various organizations to which you have traditionally belonged. So people actually know that this is an armed resistance to a colonial power that has been controlling the lives and the deaths of the Palestinian people in Gaza for decades. And it is an uprising. And we cannot understand this uprising without understanding what it is rising up against. And if we refuse to name the violence of Israeli state power as it has been perpetrated, both explicitly through bombardment and slowly through starvation, we have betrayed ourselves as witnesses to a genocide. We have betrayed the world by not putting into language what must be said, or not putting into images what must be shown. And there's enormous cowardice. Enormous cowardice. You know, regardless of how one feels about Hamas as a political party, these are Palestinian lives that are being slaughtered. And Palestinian lives can be slaughtered because they are not regarded as lives of any kind of equal status. And we must see that the radical inequality, I guess I would say the deep dehumanization of the Palestinian, is not just exemplified by the bombardments, the killing, the wanton killing, but also in the refusal to acknowledge that these are human lives being torn from this earth in the most brutal way, and that if it were happening to any other group and they refuse to accept that treatment, we would not say they are terrorists. We would say they are acting in self-defense. We are saying they're trying to preserve their lives and the lives of those with whom they live, to whom they belong. So we have to be careful here. There are arguments we can have, and we should have, about different political parties. Of course, we're not all going to agree on the political parties, but right now, this is Palestinian life that is considered to be no life at all. And that is what the bombardments say. You are not a life. Nothing is being taken from this earth. You are not a life. Nothing has been lost. And that is the worst of genocidal logics that is at play. And unfortunately, the way the media in so many parts of the world covers this, not all of it, we have some allies, but the way the first world, the dominant global north, handles this situation is deeply complicit with the killing.
That would take me to, it's an Instagram post by Muhammad Hassan on October 18, and I quote him: "I am queer, I am Arab, and fuck you if you want to support the first without acknowledging the second."
Yes, nice.
And it takes me to a page, it's another page on social media called Queering the Map, which is a mapping platform dedicated to digital archiving LGBTQ plus experience in relation to physical space. So here comes a map of Gaza with this testimony. If you would like to read it.
I've always imagined you and me sitting out in the sun, hand and hand, free at last. We spoke of all the places we would go if we could, yet you are gone now. If I had known that bombs raining down on us would take you from me, I would have gladly told the world how I adored you more than anything. I'm sorry, I was a coward. Well, that is a heartbreak. But let me say, of course, there is this pinkwashing that has been well documented. The Israelis say that they are the place where gay and lesbian and queer lives, trans people are all welcome, and that all the Arab nations, or Palestine in particular, take your pick, they use both, are not places where gay, lesbian, queer, trans people can live freely. But in fact, the rabbinic authorities have been attacking the rights of gay, lesbian, trans people within Israel. There's lots of homophobia, especially given the demands to reproduce. Although, as some have pointed out to me, that the Israeli state makes it easier for lesbians to use reproductive technology because that way they will reproduce more Jews. Ah, how beautiful that they give us our rights for that purpose. But look, there have always been rich gay, lesbian, queer communities throughout the Arab world, in Beirut, which has for many, many decades been a center of such communities, nightlife, connections. We all know this. And also in Palestine, I've had the honor of meeting several queer activists who are very clear that being queer, being in favor of BDS, being anti-Zionist, being anti-colonial, all go together in a single politics, because you can't be opposed to one oppression without being opposed to them all. And the queer people in Palestine are clearly living them all at once. They are intersecting oppression that they live in their lives. And we should not buy the idea that life is somehow unlivable for them. No, that's not true. They don't live according to the standards of hypervisibility that dominate the European urban centers, but that does not mean they're not living lives of desire, sexuality, intimacy, connection, queer kinship, in ways that work for them and also sometimes allow them to sustain relations with their communities, who are not uniformly homophobic, although that is the image we have, or that we are given in the homo-nationalist media. So yes, we see it here too, throughout the world, that increasing numbers of queer people are joining in movements for racial justice, for the rights of the indigenous, including Palestinians understood as indigenous, that we understand that these oppressions are interconnected, and it would be contradictory and unjust to stand for one oppression at the expense of others, or to stand for one oppression against it and then be complicit with the acts of domination that are directed against other vulnerable communities.
In your opinion, is the act of resistance, can the act of resistance also be defined as a queer phenomenon, as a queer muscle?
Nice. Queer muscle. I'm so happy with that phrase. You're going to make me laugh today, and I thank you. I thank you. This is that moment of uplift. We were talking about queer muscle. Oh my God, it's great. Well, so interesting. Look, what's queer is what's unpredictable. What's queer is, we gather together for resistance and we don't know what the effects will be. We don't always have like a straight route to justice. We come together, there are certain kinds of effects that take place. We don't anticipate them, and yet they do take place, and we find other groups forming and other actions happening. That's a queer trajectory in my mind. It's not directed toward a single end. It doesn't work according to a Leninist plan that's totally worked out. There's some spontaneity in it, to cite Rosa Luxemburg for the queer future. Muscle is fun. I mean, muscle is a figure for strength, physical strength, but for those of us who don't have that, we're maybe old, or maybe we have disabilities, or maybe we've been injured. There's a different kind of strength. Maybe it's a different kind of muscle. Maybe there's some muscling around we do with words. Maybe there's some muscling around we do with our wheelchairs. We're making our presence known. We're in English we say you muscle into a scene. You find your way in. You make yourself known. So maybe we can expand the various meanings of muscle to be inclusive in that way.
Muscles of poetry also.
Yes, for sure.
I want to take you to Rafeef Ziade. She's a Canadian Palestinian spoken word artist and activist. I'm sure you've heard this passage. It was in London in November 2011.
Today, my body was a TV'd massacre, and let me just tell you, there is nothing your UN resolutions have ever done about this, and no soundbite I come up with, no matter how good my English gets, no soundbite will bring them back to life, no soundbite will fix this. We teach life, sir, we Palestinians wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world life, sir.
We, Palestinians, wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world life, sir. We teach life, sir. And I would edit this moving quote by adding an observation of mine. What do the smiles of the Ghazawis, what does the humor of the Ghazawis, what does the laughter of the Ghazawis, even in the darkest hours of humanity, teach us about? Que nous apprend la Palestine sur le monde? Que nous apprend la Palestine sur nous-mêmes?
Ah oui. Well, let me say this. When I was allowed through the Israeli border, which I have not been for many years, I did visit several places in Palestine, people at Beirut and Jenin, spent time in Hebron and outside of Ramallah as well. And in every case, in every dinner table I went to, which will be very familiar to you and to everyone else who's been part of that life, there was great food and enormous laughter. And part of it had to do with the absurdity of existence, right? You're going to the store to buy some bread and a tank comes in front of you and you don't really know what to do. But it's absurd that the tank is there and you have to go around it or you hide underneath it, or, you know, there is a kind of magnificent absurdist humor, even in the midst of a sense of being existentially threatened by an incursion of military force. And there's the absurdity of Israeli power and its ways of describing what it does or justifying what it does. It's absurd logic, and people can name that and know that. But the laughter strikes me as somewhat contagious, especially around the table. I saw people, again, their relationships were bonded through laughter, and their common life together was affirmed through laughter and food and song. And also poetry, you know, people did cite poetry as part of everyday life. It wasn't this rarefied field that you went to the university to study. It was in the life, many songs, many poems, which keep oral traditions alive and give aliveness to the community. So I think that it's a beautiful phrase. I don't know if those of us who are not Palestinian can say we are Palestinian. I don't know what it means to do that. I think we have to mark the difference between the enormous privilege of those of us who live outside of this, who live outside Gaza, live outside West Bank, or those who are living in refugee camps in the south of Lebanon or elsewhere. I mean, we on the outside who are not Palestinian, especially those of us who are Jewish, we cannot say we are Palestinian, even though we can hear the Palestinian claim to life, the Palestinian affirmation of life. And this is enormously important, not just for them, but for the world. Because if the Israeli state had its way, they would define the Palestinians as a kind of death machine that has to be subdued. And that is simply not the case.
Here comes our beloved Jean Genet. Just
Oui.
Okay. Quelle sottise. On dit que j'ai aidé les Palestiniens. Ce sont eux qui m'ont aidé à vivre.
Ah, magnifique. I think it's true. I mean, Genet was supporting Palestine before most French intellectuals ever thought to support Palestine. And he was immersed as far as he could be in Palestinian life and in the situation of radical dispossession. But it is also true that he was remade or transformed as a European by virtue of his engagement with Palestinian life. He became another person, and he was grateful for that transformation. It made him more capacious. It dislocated his Eurocentrism. It allowed him to feel in a way that he had not felt before. He understood the coldness, the moral deadness with which so many Europeans had approached the question of Palestine. He was alive to the question. And I think it's true that it gave him life. It allowed him to see what the struggle for life, the affirmation of life, was when it was taking place in and through the rubble, as people sought to rebuild their worlds or to support one another. I think that it's a beautiful phrase by him because it resists the arrogance of humanitarian aid, like, oh, we must help the Palestinians, they need aid. And of course they do need aid, don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying don't give them aid, but it can become a permanent posture of patronizing European arrogance, right? Which is not the same as equality, which is not the same as knowing people or being in a transformative relationship with them, allowing oneself to be transformed by them. By doing that, Genet undercut a certain kind of European arrogance, and I admire him for that.
I'm going to move from Jean Genet to San Francisco. Mira Stern, she presents herself as being a queer, white, Jew witch from San Francisco, an educator and a consultant. I will quote her. To my community, to my beloved Jewish people, I am curious, how much more suffering are we willing to tolerate? How much more brutality we are willing to be complicit in? How much more harm and destruction we are willing to have done in our name before we finally admit that this is a failed project, that Zionism is predicated to the dispossession and humiliation and brutality, death, harm, and traumatizing of Palestinian people. When are we going to admit that we have had enough? When are we going to commit to returning to our ancestral values of hope and connectedness and love and justice? When are we going to say enough? And another friend of mine, Matt Bernstein, who presents himself as a friendly queer Jew with very long nails. I can think of nothing less Jewish than what Israel is doing to Palestinians. It is not in spite of my Jewish identity that I support the liberation of Palestinian people. It is because of it. That was on October 29th.
Lovely. Well, I will tell you this, that, for many years, I've been part of Jewish Voice for Peace in the United States. And I remember when it was a very small organization and I basically knew everyone who was part of it. And now it is enormous. It has so many more people have joined that they can barely keep track of the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands who have decided finally to join an explicitly anti-Zionist Jewish group. And pro-boycott, pro-BDS. So it went through two phases, right? Do we support BDS? Yes. Are we anti-Zionist? Yes. And they thought, oh, we're going to lose so many members. Yeah, maybe. But what happened? Doubled, tripled, quadrupled its membership. Beautiful. Now, this organization is extremely important. There are many people who follow it who are not members, but it gives the Jewish community a way to criticize Zionism, to criticize Israeli state violence without letting go of their Judaism. Now there's a new phase in this story where those of us who are anti-Zionist, as I am, who are pro-BDS, as I am, are called un-Jews, you know? Well, I mean, they used to say we were self-hating Jews. The Germans still say that because the Germans know what a Jew is, apparently. Who knew? But now we're un-Jews or non-Jews. We're not really Jewish. We have negated our Judaism because the Zionists will say to be a Jew is to be a Zionist. And if that were true, which it is not, that to criticize Zionism is to be anti-Jewish, if not anti-Semitic. So they have produced this piège, they have produced this trap. But it is our job to break out of that trap. Now, it is true, I also believe, as a Jewish person, that Israel has defiled and destroyed Jewish values as I have known them. I was brought up to oppose justice, to oppose genocide, to speak out, to have courage, not to be complicit. So if I act according to Jewish values now, and name the genocide for what it is, I am accused of anti-Semitism or complicity with terrorism, as are many other Jewish people. But I will tell you this, almost every Jewish dinner table in this world is being racked by debate and conflict. There is no unanimity in the Jewish community. There is no consensus. And that is an accomplishment. There are open debates on Zionism. There are open debates on the Israeli state, on occupation, on dispossession, on the right of return, on democracy, what it would look like if there were a state that were committed to democratic principles and that everyone there, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, were given equal rights and equal access to social benefits. I mean, these are questions that are now on the table. I know 3 different initiatives on rethinking binationalism or rethinking a constitution for Palestine. There's some utopian thinking that is happening even in the midst of this most dire moment. So I feel less lonely as an anti-Zionist Jew. I used to stand up in front of crowds in Germany or at Brooklyn College. I thought, okay, I have a few friends here. But now I have many. Now I have many, and the solidarities are regenerating, and the young people have their own ideas, and I don't have to be at the head anymore. There are so many people with beautiful ideas and large voices, and they are with Palestine, and they are against Israeli state violence. And it's becoming more and more known, and it's not controllable by those who want to say that to be a Jew is to be a Zionist, or to criticize Israel is to be anti-Semitic. They will lose in the end. They will lose. It will take some time, but there's no going back to that consensus. I think it is now broken. I hope I'm right.
There's this note I wrote a few months ago, and also it's related to what the multiple disasters we've been living in Lebanon and in the region. It's there's the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's also something that I would call PTSD, perpetual traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
And as an answer to this, I quote you, I heard you a few weeks ago, the obligation to endure involves the obligation to regenerate ourselves, to find out what we can do. And we have to be grateful that we can continue to live and be part of a global resistance and there is joy in that.
Yes, true. True. But you know, the term trauma is used differently by different people, and sometimes I think what is happening is beyond trauma. I see that you're trying to capture something of this by talking about a perpetual traumatic state. Sometimes, you know, in the literature on trauma, we assume, oh, a trauma took place or something traumatic took place. And now there's an aftermath where people are trying to come to terms with what has happened. So it's in the past. But what if something has happened? It's totally traumatic. The loss of family, of so many people lost dozens of people in their family. And yet they're also being bombarded and they are afraid of being killed and they know that they will lose more. So there's no aftermath. There's no post. In other words, there's no moment to mourn or to reckon with a traumatic moment or a traumatic experience of that proportion, because the proportions keep increasing. And there's no place to stand. There's no pause. There's no time that is not a time of brutality. So then the question is how to live in this time. I saw the other day the kites went up into the air in Rafah. How amazing that the survivors of this, those who are living with not just having lost so much and being exposed to such violence, but living under contemporary violence and expecting more, found the time with their children to produce the kites and set them aloft. It's an ultimate act of resistance, because there is joy and there is play and there is the love of the child and childish love, childish play being asserted in the midst of this violence. So we can look at those kites and say, who is violent here? Who is violent here?
There's this banner that I spotted in a demonstration that says, "Be silent when kids sleep, not when they die." On October 23rd, Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, a British Palestinian plastic and reconstructive surgeon who was operating for 43 days, sent the following voice note with a panting and profoundly shaken voice. And we're only on October 23rd. I quote him. My brain is no longer processing the sheer number.
And just the tragedy. I mean, the number of kids is just beyond belief.
It's just unbelievable. And they're getting away with it, Arwa. They're getting away with it. I mean, it's carnage on a level that I've just not heard or seen. 5 families wiped out just between 1:30 and 7 this morning.
How would the day after, if a day after ever comes, look like for them and for all of us?
I think we have to accept that it is unfathomable. What people have gone through, those who will survive, it's unfathomable. There will have to be some efforts at healing, knowing full well that full repair is not possible. And whether that takes place in the context of mental health care, which should be organized, led, implemented by Palestinians themselves, or forms of art making for children, play, if it's possible, expression. I do not know, but I do think that those who have endured what has happened will obviously be devastated at some level that no one will be able to reach or repair. And that is another casualty of war. The soul of the children, that's a casualty of war. And not just the children, but everyone who somehow makes it through.
On the night of the Baptist hospital bombardment, sorry for quoting myself, I wrote this sentence: the 21st century ends tonight in Gaza. And we're still here, and I'm still writing, of course, and my words are here. I'm lying when I say I lost my word, but there's something.
Yes. But you're not quite lying either. You're saying something has come to an end, that whatever we have known as history is not what we know now. If Palestinians rather are living at the end of the century, if the century stopped in 2023, sometime in October or November or December, does that mean we are now, or they are now, living outside of time? Or that time has stopped and language has stopped? I think it's possible to say that the continuity of life that many of us presuppose, making plans, thinking about the future, that continuity was broken. And we can't really talk about the future unless we imagine it as somehow emerging from the present. But that would mean that there would be a link or a transition. And if the transition is broken, if the assumption can no longer be made that these lives will continue to live, nobody can make that assumption, then the future is torn off from the present, and the present becomes the end of history as we know it. I think we're talking about a level of trauma that needs new language. I want to call it trauma, of course, that's the language we have, and it draws the world's attention to some degree, but maybe there's another level of soul murder or psychic destruction for which we need a different vocabulary. Perhaps we just circle around it and name it as we can, and maybe the fragments are what we have to name what we are witnessing.
We only have a few minutes left, and I would love to hear the words of Fadwa Touqan through your voice. Do you have the text, or do I send it to you? That's a beautiful fanzine I found par hasard.
You sent me one moment. Tell me again here I have it. I read through this beautiful document. There's so many incredible poems that you sent me, but the one you want me to read is on what page?
It's on page, sorry, just 1 second. The page 7 on the document as in the PDF.
Yes, my liberty. Okay. My liberty, my liberty, my liberty, a sound I repeat with angry lips under the exchange of fire and flames. I run after it despite my chains and follow its tracks despite the night and struggle ardently for my liberty, my liberty, my liberty. And the holy river and bridge repeat, my liberty, and the two banks reiterate, my liberty, and the raging wind and thunder, tornadoes and rain echo the sound, my liberty. I shall carve its name while I resist on the land by the walls and the doors in the temple of the Virgin, in the altar and the fields, on every hill and every valley, and every curve and road, in prison, in the torture rooms, and on the gallows, despite the chains and the house demolition. I shall carve its name until I see it again, extending to my homeland, and flourish until every inch of the land is covered, until every door is opened by red liberty, and the night vanishes, and the day breaks. My liberty, my liberty, my liberty.
Thank you.
Thank you. You give me poetry. You lift me up. I hope I've given you something as well.
I have one last question. If Palestine is liberated tomorrow morning, that's a question I often ask to Palestinians in Palestine and the diaspora. I live not far from Sabra and Shatila, the Palestinian camps here. And we ask kids, we ask elderly, we ask people, if Palestine is liberated tomorrow morning, what would you, Judith, do?
I would cry and I would dance. And I would join the people on the street in celebration and amazement.
So much love to you.
Oh, and to you, thank you so much. I'm very touched by the fact that you reach out to me and include me in your conversation.
I hope we continue this conversation in the future. And this serious invitation, I would really love to have you in Beirut.
I would like to come sometime. I was supposed to come and could not, but if my health permits, I will come. Thank you so much. Shukran. Okay. Okay. Au revoir.